All right, welcome to Pasture Management 101. I'm Jennifer Bearden. I'm the agriculture agent here in Okaloosa County. So I work for the University of Florida IFAS Extension here. A part of my job is to help livestock owners manage their pastures and also manage their animals. Normally, this is a class that I actually do face-to-face this kind of time of year. But given the circumstances, I decided to go ahead and move it online. The neat thing about online is that you still can ask me questions. So I may not respond to them right away while I'm presenting, but after I'm done, I'll close all this out and be able to respond to questions. But the great thing is that it'll actually be there for you to refer back to. So the video will stay here and you can refer back to it, or if you have to step away, the video is here and you can come back to it. So that's kind of a neat thing about presenting it in this fashion. So we'll get started. We'll talk about let me see if I can get it to advance here. There we go. So we'll get started talking about pasture management. First, we're going to talk about forages that we grow here in Northwest Florida. And then we'll talk a little bit about soil basics for our pastures and then fertilization of our pastures. But first, I want to start with this slide here, overgrazing. If you overgraze your pastures, there's really no sense in talking about pasture management from managing an existing pasture standpoint. What we really need to be talking about is renovating your pastures and starting over again. Overgrazing is going to lead to all these problems that you see on the screen. A good symptom that you're going to see if you've been overgrazing is you're going to see a lot of centipede intrusion into your pastures. That's when our pastures start getting centipede growing in them rather than Bahiagrass or Bermudagrass, which we prefer. And that's just a symptom of it. Typically, we say we want to have in Florida 1.5 acres to 4 acres per animal unit, depending on how productive your soil type is. And so that's 1.5 acres to 4 acres per animal unit. And a lot of sources list horses as 1.25 animal units per horse, and that's for an adult horse. So, and all of us know we don't. There is no real average horse. So you may have horses that eat more or eat less. But just having a general idea of looking out at your pastures and seeing if it looks like it's overgrazed. So we'll start with our forages that we grow here, and we grow well. We have warm season forages. We have cool season forages. So our warm season forages are what we're growing now. We've got Bahiagrass, Bermudagrass, Limpograss. Those are perennial, meaning they come back year after year. And then we have a couple of annual grasses that we'll talk about, pearl millet and sorghum Sudangrass. Now, cool season grasses, we have things like annual ryegrass and oats, rye, wheat, triticale. Then we also have some legumes. So we'll talk about 2 warm season legumes that do well here, Perennial Peanut and Alyceclover, and then our cool season legumes like our Clovers. So Bahiagrass. Bahiagrass is probably our #1 grass that we talk about when we talk about grazing. Its nutritive value is low to medium, depending on how you manage it. It's easy to manage though, so that's why we like it. Target pH is only 5.5, grows well in a variety of our soil types here, and it tolerates grazing pressure. Now, I say it tolerates grazing pressure, but it doesn't tolerate overgrazing, but it does tolerate grazing pretty well. Bermudagrass, our nutritive value of Bermudagrass is actually higher. It's very dependent on how you manage it though. It likes a pH closer to that 6 range, but it'll tolerate 5.5 to 7.5. It grows well in a variety of soil types, but it requires more management than Bahiagrass, and it doesn't tolerate as heavy grazing as Bahiagrass will tolerate. Now our Limpograss does well in wet areas. So if we have some of those low-lying wet areas that you're trying to graze, this is a great grass for that. Target pH is 5.5, but it will do okay in more acidic soils. It's vegetatively propagated, meaning we have to plant it by bringing in actual parts of the plant and planting it that way. It is susceptible to 2,4-D, which is a pasture herbicide that we use in a lot of our herbicides. So we have to be careful what we manage our weeds with. It performs really, really well in South Florida because it can survive their winters there, but it will survive ours and come back in ours. But it is a grass that is not light tolerant or light sensitive, but it is temperature sensitive. So it doesn't stop growing until we get our first frost. So that's kind of a neat thing about Limpograss. And then pearl millet is one of our annuals. This is really the annual I recommend for pastures. And I say it is the annual I recommend for pastures. It's tolerant to our pH ranges, grows well in our soil types. It's safe for horses. And so this makes one that I recommend. Now the next one, Sorghum Sudangrass, I don't recommend. It tolerates a lot of pHs, it tolerates soil conditions, but it causes interstitial cystitis in horses, but it also causes nitrate poisoning and prussic acid poisoning. So due to that, I don't recommend it because it's just a big risk. Now, sometimes some years you can plant it and it's not going to hurt anything. And then other years we get a drought and then all of a sudden you've got problems. So I don't recommend planting this. Then some of our cool season. Annual ryegrass is a cheap and very effective forage. It's very high quality, high crude protein, high total digestible nutrients. It is an annual, so you may have to reseed it, but it can reseed itself if you allow it to go to seed every year. It's very easy to grow in our area and it makes good hay too. But I will say you need to plant the recommended varieties. Planting the varieties that you're going to get off the shelf at a box store is not going to give you the right variety for growing horses or cattle off of. So check with us and we'll get you the recommended varieties. Oats are good for grazing and for hay. It's going to be highly palatable to the animals. We do have some diseases in oats, so you want to plant our recommended varieties. It's better for well-drained soils, so it's not good for wet sites. Now, rye is susceptible to some diseases, so we do want to plant resistant varieties. This is cereal rye, which is different from ryegrass. It looks more like wheat. It's good for grazing or hay or even as a cover crop. And then wheat you can plant and it can be grazed. It's more expensive to plant typically just because we eat it as humans. So we're competing with ourselves when we plant it. Very high nutritive value. And once again, we want you to plant recommended varieties. And then Triticale. Triticale is a man-made cross between wheat and rye. It's very, very high in nutritive value when managed properly. It's high in total digestible nutrients and crude protein. It can be grazed, and the flour derived has very little gluten in it. So this actually is catching the eye of people to grow for human consumption as well. Now, our legumes, we have perennial peanut. This is not to be confused with a peanut plant. This is perennial peanut or rhizoma peanut. It looks like a peanut and the flower looks like a peanut plant, but it doesn't grow peanuts. We refer to this as Florida's alfalfa. It's very, very high quality forage, comparable to alfalfa, but it grows better here than alfalfa grows here. Mostly used for hay, but you can have it in a grazing system. You can interplant it with Bahiagrass and have a very, very good system. The drawback is it's a high sprigging cost, so it has to be vegetatively propagated. Like I said, Limpograss had to be vegetatively propagated. And when you mix it in with our grasses, weed control is a challenge because you've got a broadleaf mixed in with a grass. So consider that when you want to plant it. And then Alyceclover. Alyceclover is high nutritive value, can be mixed in with the grass, but once again, you're mixing a broadleaf with a grass. That makes weed control hard. It can be used for grazing or for hay. And then our winter legumes are clovers, crimson clover, white clover, ball clover. All of these clovers are very palatable, high nutritive value, grows well with our grasses, but you want to caution on how much you allow the animal to graze. You want to probably limit graze most of our horses on this. Cattle can graze on it pretty well, but we want to limit graze horses on it. It's just really, really high in crude protein and high in starches and other nutrients. So our soil fertility basics. So we're going to go on just really quick soil fertility because that affects your pasture management. It's more than just applying lime and fertilizer. The old wives' tale of apply lime every 3 years and fertilize this way. Don't listen to any of that. We have a lot better system than just going on guesswork. So I say test, don't guess. So soil sampling, get a clean plastic bucket, get a tool, a soil probe, an auger, a shovel, take 10 to 20 subsamples from the top 6 to 8 inches of your topsoil. You want to grid or random sample. Zigzagging kind of puts you in the same pattern, but if you random sample it actually gives you better results. So you want to mix all those soil samples, subsamples together in a bucket. You want to lay that out on a newspaper or paper towel to dry overnight. And you want to then send it to the appropriate lab for testing. UF does have an extension soils testing lab. The test is $10 with our lab. There are other private labs that you can use as well. So then you get your soil test results back and then you look at it and say, what does this tell me? I don't know what it tells me. So we've got our target pH up there. That's what we want it to be. And then you've got the pH of your actual sample. So the target pH of this was 6.5 and then your sample is 5.9. So that means we're a little lower than what we want to see. Then you see our phosphorus there. It says it's very low. We see our potassium there saying it's low, our magnesium saying medium, and then our calcium at 117 parts per million. So what does that tell you? That tells you we're going to need some lime because this is for a cool season legume or legume grass mixture. It tells you we need lime. It tells you we need no nitrogen, and that's because we're mixing in legumes, and legumes actually capture their own nitrogen out of the air and use it. It tells you we need 100 pounds of phosphorus per acre and 160 pounds of potassium and 20 pounds of magnesium. And this is typically what you're going to see. Now, if you're putting the lime down and you use dolomite lime, you don't have to put the magnesium in because the magnesium comes in with the lime. And I will say, going back to that last slide, we are here to help you figure out what your soil sample results mean and how to interpret those. So our soil fertility, we have our primary nutrients of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And then we have our secondary nutrients that we still need there are calcium, magnesium, and our sulfur. And sometimes our soils here are low in sulfur. So a lot of times fertilizer companies go ahead and mix that in. So that's good. And then we have micronutrients of boron, copper, zinc, iron, chlorine, the manganese, and molybdenum sometimes that are needed. And then we talk about pH. pH is the most important part of your soil results. If the pH is not right, you're wasting your time doing anything else. So we have to get the pH right first, and then we need to worry about all the other nutrients. So our soil texture, it does matter if we've got sand or clay or silt, how much of that is in there. We need to kind of know what you have. The easiest way to do that is to go here to this website. If you Google Web Soil Survey, it'll pull up a USDA website, and you just basically click that start button right there on your screen, and it will pull up a tool for you. You enter your address or the address of the property you're trying to manage, basically, and then it pulls up that aerial map, and you draw a little box around your pasture and go to the button there where it'll pull up your soil survey, and then you can actually look at and visually see the different types of soils that are on your property that you're trying to manage. Sandy soils are going to be highly leaching soils, so you want to make sure you split apply your fertilizers. The clay soils will hold on and bind some of that a little better, but you still want to be careful with that because we typically have a lot of sandy soils here in our environment. So we talked about the pH being the most important. The pH tells us our lime requirement, how much lime we need to bring that pH up to where we need it to be. Because typically in our area, we're going to have low pH. So we're going to see pHs. It's not uncommon for me to see 4.5, 5, 5.5. And if you look here on the screen where our nutrients are more available, starts getting into that 6 to 6.5 range where we have the most amount of those nutrients available. That's why I've said that pH is important, and plants have their desired pH is based on how much of those nutrients that plant needs to take up. So Bahiagrass wanting 5.5, that's where all the nutrients that it wants are available. You see that phosphorus is pretty small at 5.5. That's because our Bahiagrasses don't need a lot of phosphorus. So it depends on what the plant needs and then the plant nutrient availability at the right pH. So our nutrients, what we're going to add into the soil. So a bag of fertilizer typically has 3 numbers on it, and those 3 numbers correspond to the 3 primary nutrients that our plants need. So the first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the last number is potassium. Now, if you look at the bag, it'll also have a tag on it where it tells you how much calcium and magnesium and sulfur and things like that are in it. But the 3 numbers on the bag, so a 10, 10, 10 is 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. So our soil-based management practices, what do we need to do? Take-home message is soil test for your pH, your phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and calcium every 2 to 3 years. Then you want to follow the UF-IFAS extension fertilizer recommendations for whatever grass or legume you're trying to grow. And we want to monitor that crop nutrition, or we want to split apply. And I just recommend on pastures, just go ahead and split apply. So 2 to 3 applications of fertilizer made throughout the growing season. And then proper irrigation, we don't typically have irrigation in our pastures, but I wanted to show you the next slide here. And this is one of those old wives' tales, was to put your fertilizer out before you get a good rain. This illustrates in our sandy soils what happens when you put fertilizer out ahead of a rainfall event. This is fertilizer that's been applied, or blue dye with the fertilizer applied. And we, right before we got 1 inch of, this was irrigation, but if it's the same thing for 1 inch of rainfall. You've got the fertilizer and that dye moving 12 inches deep into the soil profile. And unless you're doing an amazing job of managing your Bahiagrass, those roots typically aren't going to be able to go down 12 inches. Now, I have seen some that go down twice that, but they're very, very well managed. So you apply that fertilizer and ahead of a rainfall event, and it's easy for us to get 1 inch of rainfall here in one rainfall event, and that rainfall event just pushes it right past our root system. Or what's coming this weekend is called for 4 to 6 inches of rainfall. If you do put the fertilizer out now ahead of that rainfall event, if we do get 4 to 6 inches, you can imagine that the fertilizer is going to be well past the root zone of the Bahiagrass, and you're just wasting your time and your money and causing that fertilizer to then contaminate our water supply. So we'll talk about fertilization, the 4 R's of fertilization. So we talk about right rate, right time, right place, and right source. So our right rate, that depends on our soil test result. Also depends a little bit on our soil type, the crop needs, and our anticipated yield. That tells us the right rate. So typically we say, you know, your pasture needs 100 pounds of nitrogen or 33 pounds of phosphorus or 66 pounds of potassium. Now I put those numbers in to make the math easy. That would give us approximately 470 pounds of 21,714 fertilizer to supply that pasture with those needs. So that would be the right rate. And the right time, our nutrients should be applied when the plants are actively growing. Okay, so you don't want to put fertilizer down on your Bahiagrass in March because it hasn't started actively growing. Mainly because even if it's warm, Bahiagrass is light sensitive, so day length sensitive. It doesn't start actively growing until our day lengths get longer. So it doesn't matter if it's warm in March. What matters is those day lengths, and it starts actively growing as our day lengths get longer. So we don't want to see application of a fertilizer on Bahiagrass until late April or May. And then we want to split apply. So I would say at least 2 applications. So a May application and a late June application would be perfect for most of our Bahiagrass pastures. And don't apply before or during a rain event. We've already talked about that. So right rate, or right place. So for our established pastures, our right place is going to be on the soil surface because that's what we do. We run across it and toss it on the soil surface. For our pastures during established, you may want to go ahead and subsurface or till that in because you've already got the land tilled. So you may want to go ahead and till that in. The nitrogen fertilizers, if they're left on the surface, can actually volatilize. They actually volatilize a lot, and you can lose up to 30% of your fertilizer easily to volatilization if you allow it to lay on the surface. So if you've already got the place disced up, go ahead and apply it, and then disc it back in or till it back in so that it's not sitting on that surface and volatilizing. So we want to optimize the amount of nutrients that gets to the root zone without leaching nutrients past the root zone. That is our goal right there. And then our right sources. Enhanced efficiency fertilizers are a great option. Basically, they can wrap a polymer around your fertilizer and allow it to slowly release to the crop. Urea is a source that we see used. Ammonium nitrate, not as much anymore with some of the problems it's having. So we typically see even stuff that's people assume is ammonium nitrate, oftentimes is mostly ammonium sulfate in the bag, which is a good thing for us because it gives us that sulfur that we definitely need in our soils. So enhanced efficiency fertilizers, we have slow release fertilizers, and that's typically our organic fertilizers. So they slowly release over time. So that's basically like spreading your manure across the field. That's a type of slow release fertilizer. And when we make a fertilizer recommendation for a pasture, we kind of take that into account that you're going to still have the animals defecating in the pasture, and so that we're going to take into account that some of those nutrients are going to be put back in by the animal. And then we have controlled release fertilizers, where there's a more controlled fashion of releasing those nutrients to the crop. So our slow release, we've got biosolids, animal manures, composts, and wood ash are our slow release fertilizers. And then our control release, we see sulfur coated ureas, poly-coated ureas, or polymer coated ureas. And then we have coatings that are urease inhibitors and nitrification inhibitors, which just basically slows a chemical process of that nitrogen breaking down. So And with that, I will take any questions. Let me get this screen out of the way, and I will go back to the Facebook screen, and we'll see if I have any questions. Well, I don't see any questions right now, but I'll stay on here for a few more minutes to see if anybody does have any questions, and you can just type it into the comments below the video here, and I can try to answer them. Let me see here. Answer that question. He sent it via our messenger on our county page here, on this page here. Okay, we've got one question that said, missed most of the presentation. Will I be doing it again? Actually, since it's on Facebook Live and I have it to save as a video on here, you can come back and view it at your pleasure. So it will be here for you to review and view. Now, let's see, how do you kill off centipede that's taking over your grass pasture? Okay, so for centipede intrusion, and that is one of the things I started with, typically we see centipede intrusion happening when we are overgrazing pastures. And typically we want to, what we have to do now that the centipede is there is we need to kill it with glyphosate. So we need to just go ahead and kill it all. It needs to be allowed to sit there for, I would say, 4 weeks to make sure that you get it, all of it killed, because it takes some time for glyphosate to actually kill it. And then depending on how large the patch is, you can either wait and allow and fertilizer your Bahiagrass and allow it to take back over that spot if it's a small spot, and by small I would say probably 10 foot in diameter. But then if it's larger than that, we're going to have to probably replant some of our Bahiagrass. And then we need to take a look at what's causing the centipede intrusion to happen. And oftentimes it's overgrazing. So if we've got too many animals grazing on one pasture. So with that, do we have any more questions? Answer one here via messenger. Yes, I will say I'm sorry I wasn't able to get this to stream to the event page because it was the way I'm having to share it to be able to present it. So can you tell me the lifespan of Bahia? Bahiagrass can just keep going and going and going forever. There are pastures that are older than I am that are still going. So 30-40 years, and since it spreads by rhizomes, spreads by seeds, it's continually renewing itself. You should be good, but we can take a look at it and see We do have a problem sometimes that you may have planted an improved variety of Bahiagrass and it mixes with our not native, but our more naturalized Pensacola Bahia, and then you end up with a hybrid, and it ends up going back to the old Pensacola. Pensacola Bahiagrass came into the port here, was discovered here anyways. And what they did was they took the Pensacola Bahia and bred it and came up with lots of different other types of Bahiagrass. So the Pensacola Bahiagrass is actually the parent of most of our improved Bahiagrass varieties. And then there's also then Argentine Bahia, which is a very good Bahia. In fact, it's probably one of the it's better than Pensacola in its quality and the amount of yield that it gives you. So hopefully that answers that question. But if you want us to look at it, you can get in touch with me. We're here at the office. It's 850-689-5850 is our office. If I'm not here at my desk, they can transfer you to my cell phone and you can get in touch with me. I do stay on the go a lot, as you can imagine. I help row crop farmers and vegetable farmers, as well as doing livestock. So I stay on the go quite a bit. We'll wait a few minutes to see if we have any more questions. I know there's a lag between when I'm talking and actually when it actually streams on Facebook, so I'll give it a few more minutes. The link never updated that you were live. Yes, I got a message that it didn't update. But hopefully we can, I'll put a thing on the event page so that they can see it, because since it's recorded. Let me answer that. Yes, it is being recorded, and it will stay here. Now, I will say it takes a little bit for Facebook to render everything and have it available after a live event, but it will be by later this evening. It'll be on there and be able to be viewed. Let me. fact, I think I might go to the event and just make sure the event page and there we go. Post a comment there where they can see that it's will be available on here. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, but of course, since this was a live event, but it's recorded, you can post your questions anytime, and I will be checking the comments and can answer them. Or you, like I said, you can call me directly or go online to our Facebook page or onto our actual website, and you can find my email and can email me with any questions as well. So, all right, with that, I thank y'all, and I'm going to sign out for the night. Thank y'all for joining me.